So for those of you who haven't met Moeed yet, for over 20 years, he has been obsessed with the how and why people make the decisions they do. Moeed's journey started when he graduated neuroscience. He was learning about the brain structure and the impact that this had on the psychology of decision making. So fast forwarding several years, he has won several sales awards. He has led sales teams for very well-known brands, and he's specialized in selling to C-level executives across 4 continents. And he has founded the proverbial door because he was quite frustrated about existing advice that was out there and the training that was out there on sales and persuasion. So a lot of these types of training, Moeed feels, are stuck in the 90s, they're disjointed, and they do not consider the psychology behind decision making. And he is, I think, one of the only people in the world with both neuroscience and extensive sales experience. So please welcome Moeed, and I'll pass it on to you and to tell us about how to scale our teams better.
Thank you, Victoria. So yeah, today's session is around scaling your team. So this is where your business is, you've received funding or you've managed to grow your business in a particular way, and you're in a position now to hire a sales team. So finally, you don't have to do all the sales yourself. You can now kind of really scale and grow through other people who should hopefully have the expertise to do so. So this is different from the last session, and if you want to have a look at the last session, we can share with you the link to the recording. That was more around helping founders and more non-sales people learn how to become better persuaders without compromising on your values and beliefs or having to sound too salesy. So that if you're interested, I would encourage you to look at that video as well. What we're going to be talking about are some of the fundamentals behind how to scale your sales team. We're also going to be talking about some of the common mistakes and misconceptions that founders go through, because a lot of founders don't have a sales background. Most of them come from a technical background or subject matter background, and their understanding of sales is limited. And that can cause some very harmful mistakes to occur. So what are some of the misconceptions and common mistakes here? The first one is, and it sounds very weird, which is, hiring successful salespeople. Well, wait, why would that be a mistake? Well, not all salespeople are created equal. You have no idea why that salesperson happens to be successful, and does that translate into success for you as well? And we'll go on to some of those reasons why in relation to your customers. And like I said, there are a few types of salespeople, right? So here are 6 different types that are the most common. Not all of them have the same success rate. Some of them can be problems for your business, especially if you have if your products and solutions require a more collaborative approach where you need Sorry, was I muted there for a second?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what happened.
That's okay.
Okay.
That's okay. So those types of solutions where you need like a team approach, especially if they're very big products, very big solutions, then the lone wolf. Let me just get my annotation going here. The lone wolf is going to be very harmful to your approach. So you really don't want to, and in another company, that lone wolf person may have been very successful, right? So success is based upon different factors that may have worked for other companies, but may not necessarily work for you. So the next one is, okay. So the next mistake that's often made is that people are obsessed, especially founders, they're obsessed with product expertise. They're obsessed with the fact that For a salesperson to be successful, it means that they have to really know about the product and service. They've got to be able to articulate the product and service in the best way possible. And in fact, buyers are impressed by the product and expertise. That is absolutely not true. In fact, this may sound contentious, but product knowledge is the least of the valuable skills that buyers look for. I'm not saying that salespeople should not have a certain level of product knowledge. Absolutely true. However, there is a point where increased knowledge results in incremental value, right? And there are other things that are really important. So absolutely, there should be an element of product expertise, but if you're focusing on that as a means to success and sales success, that's a common mistake. The next thing that usually happens is that founders and leaders measure their salespeople's success purely on sales. That is a very big mistake. Sales is the end result of doing all the right activities. And if you don't have a balance of being able to look at those indicator metrics, then you're going to end up seeing bad results so much further down the line without realizing maybe why that's happened. So measuring your salespeople purely on just sales and saying, well, depending on how they're tracking to their sales, that's going to tell us success. That's a very big mistake. We need to have a balance of looking at some of the right behaviors and activities, and you'll see why I say behaviors is very important later on. This is a very surprising one to hear when I speak to a lot of founders. But hiring is very similar to hiring a successful salesperson. Hiring an experienced sales leader could be a very big mistake for a number of reasons. The first reason is that you have no idea what made that person successful. And experienced doesn't mean successful as well. The environment that they probably grew up in their sales career may not be the environment that's conducive for your business, and especially how your customers like to engage with you. Sales, as well as business, as well as the world, has progressed a lot, especially during the pandemic. It created a seismic shift in the buyer-seller relationship, to the point where studies say that 33% of buyers want a seller-free sales experience. That means they don't want to have any experience with salespeople. They prefer to have everything digital, even in B2B. Now, what they want and what they get is very different. The world hasn't moved that far, but that tells you the level of change that's happened. And not all experienced sales leaders are able to adapt in such a world. So hiring an experienced sales leader is not going to be the answer. The second reason why hiring an experienced sales leader is you can't leverage what you don't know. Most founders make this mistake that because they don't know sales and because they view sales as a low-skilled profession, they look at hiring an experienced salesperson, a sales leader, and then they say, do you know what? I'm just going to leave this with him or her. I'm going to trust them with this. But you can't leverage what you don't know, because you don't know if the activities that they're investing their time in are the right activities for sales growth. You're not able to hold them accountable. You're not even able to measure if they're being successful or not. So without the knowledge of sales and sales environment, you don't have to be an expert, but you should at least be knowledgeable enough to be able to ask the right questions, to be able to see potentially dangerous situations before they arise. That is going to be really, really important. And hiring an experienced sales leader and just farming this out to them and trusting them with this 100% is a very big mistake. The next one are harmful expectations. And this is quite a common one. So we look at things like how many calls or how many dials are you making a day, right? Rather than, so it's quantity over quality. One of the most common ones I hear are how many proposals or RFPs or tenders have you sent out in the last month? That's a very harmful one, because we equate quantity with value. And when you send out an RFP, it's sometimes a monumental effort. It takes weeks to send out a really good RFP, especially in a competitive bid. It has hours of involvement, not just from the salesperson, but from his or her team as well. right? So the product team, the technical team, etc. It even takes involvement from the founders themselves. And placing that expectation is very harmful because the proportion of those tenders that then come back to a deal agreed is very, very, very low, which makes the whole process very unprofitable. But yet, even though we might know that, we still have those expectations on the sellers themselves. So those are two examples of some very harmful expectations that can damage the sales process. And also damage the relationship your sellers have with your buyers and damage your brand. The next one is the strategy element. And most founders have an idea of where they would like to grow to. So they might say, I spoke to a founder just last week, and he said that he wants to grow to $3 million within 2 years. But he had no real plan. And salespeople require a plan because they are at the very sharp end of the market. And you need to direct your salespeople in the right way in order for them to flourish. So without a real plan that also embodies the behaviors and the training and the coaching that's required, you're going to find that plan, that direction or that ambition that you have will not be achieved. So one of the big mistakes there is there's no real plan for how you're going to get to the target that you have. The other one is the support structures. So salespeople require a support structure. Very, very, very few salespeople in the world are able to thrive in an unstructured environment. There has to be a level of structure. So sometimes that could be no product training or even too much product training, right? As we talked about before. The other one is that sales, as I said before, is often seen as a low-skilled profession. That means they don't have any empowerment within their business. And that could be especially harmful if they have some very valuable information, insights, or feedback from the buyer's community. That's going to impact product development. That's going to impact your operations. It's going to impact your customer service elements. So if they don't feel empowered to be able to share such information, you're missing out on incredibly valuable insights that's going to actually affect your business. A lot of founders at the very early stages of their scaling, even when they have salespeople, they maintain the relationship with the clients, especially the core clients. And that's a fair thing to do, actually, and there's nothing wrong with that. What the unintended damage that can cause is that we don't expose our new sales hires to those clients. I'm not saying that those new sales hires should be the point person in the sales relationship, in the buyer relationship, but you want to have them join the meeting so that they can hear the language that those buyers use about describing the value that they get from it. Because that language is going to be used when they are courting potentially new clients. So lack of that client connection can be a very big problem. The next one is lack of long-term vision. And what I mean by that are a few things. The first and most important is lifetime value, right? Lifetime value, LTV of the customer. And we go down this route of account management, which is actually incredibly unprofitable. In the long term, it means you're highly likely to lose that client. Long-term vision value is about 3, 4, 5 years relationship. How is the world going to change? How is that going to impact the buyer? And how are we going to help them grow over that period? Which means that we are increasing the average spend per customer, right? And that is one of the most cost-effective and smartest ways to grow your business. Not necessarily just from new business, but actually growing the spend of your existing clients, clients who like you, clients who are loyal to you, clients who see value in you, by 10, 15% every year. So lack of that vision, lack of that infrastructure to do that can be very harmful for the business. And then the final one, which is a huge surprise to a lot of people I talk to, is being too entrepreneurial. And there is a danger from that. Without those support structures, just letting your salespeople decide what to do can be a recipe for disaster, because now the whole world is open to them. They lack focus. They will go after shiny new objects. So being too entrepreneurial can also go against you. This is not to say that you shouldn't encourage entrepreneurial thinking, but there needs to be a balance in that process. And without that balance, that can actually harm the way that your salespeople approach their market. So the next one. Now that we've talked about some of those common mistakes, you're probably wondering, well, what impact does that have? And why are they so important? And there are some very big costs to some of those mistakes that can occur. The first one is that immediately you can potentially lose €500,000 immediately. And that can be from the salaries, for etc., hiring the wrong sales leader, hiring the wrong salespeople. You also risk losing 20 to 60 days of time wasted during the hiring process, during the onboarding process. Now, this is not 20 to 60 days for the company. This is 20 to 60 days for every person directly involved in the hiring and onboarding process. And at this stage of your business growth, that's usually you as the founder. So that's 20 to 60 days of your time wasted if you hire the wrong person and if you make some of those mistakes. On average, a bad sales hire can cost you €85,000. So there's salaries involved in that. Oftentimes, people don't realize that the hire is not a good hire until after the probation period. So especially in Europe, there's an extensive process for being able to let go of that person. So all that can add up to €85,000 of wasted money. Not to mention the millions of euros in opportunity that's lost. Sales is a momentum game, and the typical onboarding process can be anything from 6 to 9 months of onboarding, right? And most people are surprised when I say that the average time it takes for a salesperson to be fully productive and profitable to the business is about 3 years. And that can vary, of course, but people are shocked when I say that because they expect 6 to 9 months. No, 6 to 9 months it takes to onboard that person. And some of them may become productive, but not fully productive, right? It takes time. Even when you're speaking to someone that comes from your industry or is experienced in your industry or experienced with your buyers, it still takes time for that person to become fully productive because it takes time to build the pipeline. And this point is the one that creates the most emotion in the founders that I speak to. And that is that making those kinds of mistakes can impact the value of your shares by over 40%. Actually, it shouldn't be up to, it should be over 40%. And this is not that it necessarily just declines. And through the research that I've done and also looking at other companies that have done similar research, this is an incredibly conservative number, by the way. So this is 40% of the potential value of your shares. And that's the conservative end. We've seen situations where founders have lost 300% of the value of their shares. That means that they missed out on 3 times the value of their shares because of some of those mistakes they're conducting when it comes to the sales process. So there's a huge cost to your business from some of those misconceptions. And then the final one is the damage to your brand. As I said before, sales is at the sharp end of your business touching on your buyer's marketplace. And what they say and do and how they conduct themselves reflects on you. And if you don't do it in the right way, it can absolutely damage your brand. And trust takes time to attain. It takes seconds to lose. And so you don't want to take that risk. This is not saying that you don't give the empowerment to your salespeople. You don't kind of encourage trial and error, but there are mechanisms in place to be able to mitigate any negative impact on that. And you can have the right process to make sure that they have the freedom to try new things, but they don't do so in a harmful way as well. But one of the things you can do is absolutely make sure that you're hiring the right people in the first place. The next cost, as I said, it takes 3 years to become fully productive on average for a salesperson. So you want to get clear on who you want to hire, right? So the characteristics of the individuals. You want to get clear on what do you want them to achieve. You need to get clear on why you're hiring, right? This might sound a bit weird to hear, but you might say, well, I just want them to make more sales. May not be the case, right? Sales is the end result. But how do you want them to make more sales? Is it new types of businesses or particular industries? Is it getting more money from the valuable relationships that you've built over the years with your existing clients? Or is it some other method? So why do you want them to? Another example is we need to improve our profitability. Now, if you hire the wrong salesperson who is empowered to make discounts and quite harmful discounts, then that goes counterproductive to the importance of profitability. So just saying that you want more sales growth is not enough. You've got to really get to the heart of why you want those sales growth, why it's going to be important for you, and what other factors are going to be important. You want to be clear on how they're going to represent your brand, right? Their professionalism, their approach isn't in line with your business. And also how they're going to fit in your company, right? So what place are they going to have in the business? What is the connection they're going to have with technical or product development, etc. And you will go on to see later on why that's so important. So now that we've talked about some of the common mistakes and some of the cost of those mistakes, let me share with you some things that some of the most successful founders are doing right now. And this is a very complex topic, so there's only so much detail I can go into. But if anyone has any questions at the end, or if you'd like to talk about it further, we can arrange that. The first thing that successful founders are is they're obsessed with their customers. Now, hold on a moment. I know how this is going to sound because we hear this all the time. And I can tell you from speaking with thousands of companies, barely 1% are truly customer centric. So there's more to customer centricity than just being connected to your customer, right? It's a common term that's become morphed and misused. They're obsessed with their customers means they are obsessed with understanding their customer world more so than their customers themselves. So this is not, so they've moved from becoming product obsessed to customer obsessed. And I'm not, and bear in mind, I've worked with innovation for over 6 years. So I know that this is not about doing whatever the customer tells you, because that won't translate to innovation. So I accept that and I agree with that. What I mean by this is, do we know enough about our customers? Do we know about their whole world? Is our business geared towards supporting customer growth, for example? Do we have feedback mechanisms in our business and our operations and our culture that allows the people who engage with our customers and to encourage them to ask questions, right, to get to know them and feed that back to the relevant people in the business for them to be able to consider within things like product development, operations, customer support, etc. Right? Are we measured on customer-focused metrics, not internal metrics that we think are really important? For another example is marketing, right? Are they encouraged and trained and geared towards educating our customers, right? So they take that knowledge about their customer world and knowing about their world and their industry and the challenges that they face, etc. And are they tasked with educating customers about a new way of doing something that's going to be more profitable for them, right? So those are some of the examples, but customer centricity, being obsessed about their customers, are what the first quality that we see in some of the most successful founders out there. Amazon is a great example where if you read their latest annual report, they say that their vision and their desire is to become the world's most customer-centric business. right? So this is customer centricity is something that made Amazon the company that it is today. And we see a few founders that exemplify that. The next section is the behaviors for sales. As I said before, sales is the end result. And you get that end result by encouraging, measuring, training, leading the right behaviors that you want to see in your sales team. Compensation schemes, incentive structures, etc., should be designed to encourage the right behaviors. So the successful founders are those who focus on what those behaviors need to be, and they make sure that the mechanisms they have in place encourage and train and develop those right behaviors. So there are different types of behaviors that you can use, and different levers for that. Number one, the goals and the metrics, right? The next one is the hiring and onboarding process. Again, that process should be designed to understand and observe if this person has the right behaviors. It sounds obvious and intuitive, but you'll be surprised how many founders, although intuitively know the behaviors they want to, their hiring and onboarding process is absolutely not congruent with identifying and developing those behaviors. They go down the usual approach of conducting interviews. Training and coaching and the systems in place is another lever for behavior. And then team cohesive elements. So I put a couple examples here, which is kind of territory management. So how do you kind of assign the right territories to the right salespeople? And also the structure of the team meetings and the cadence of those team meetings. The one-on-one meetings and pipeline reviews is incredibly important to understanding and developing the right behaviors as well. And then the rewards and incentives that I mentioned before. So customer centricity, focus on the right behaviors. The third thing is that the successful founders put sales at the heart of their business. Now, there is a balance here. So this is not to say that sales is all powerful in a company. And I've worked in companies where product was all powerful and sales was all powerful, right? I've advised companies that have both. And this is not about that. This is about making sure that everyone in the business understands and sees their contribution towards sales. This is about measuring and planting expectations on each of those people about what are you doing that's helping sales move forward for the business. Not the salespeople, but the sales for the company, right? So marketing, what is their support when it comes to sales? Operations, R&D and the technical divisions. So the founders of those successful companies, they make clear that there is a view and a line and a connectivity between every person's role in delivering and improving on sales. So they create sales at the heart of their business. The successful founders also have an infrastructure around their sales team. And every element of this wheel that you see here is vitally important, because it's not about just hiring the right people, giving them a target and giving them an incentive or compensation structure. That is a recipe for disaster, actually. You need to have the right infrastructure in order to make your sales team and your business truly scalable. So you might hire 1, 2, or maybe 3 people in the beginning, but once you get to 10, you don't want to rework that infrastructure. You don't want to have to spend time and money and effort creating a new infrastructure. Rather, you want a view of what that infrastructure is going to look like, and it more easily scales and morphs and adapts according to how many people you hire as the business grows. So what are the types of metrics and targets that we have? What is the maturity of our sales force? The leadership, the forecasting process. How good are we at forecasting? What are the mechanisms in there? So successful founders know that sales, the strength of sales is based on an infrastructure platform. So they create and are clear on what that infrastructure needs to be, whether that's someone that they hire in that creates that for them or a partner, etc. But they are very clear on what that is. So So here's the funnel of how that looks, right? You have clarity on your objectives as a business, right? So this much revenue growth, this much profitability, timelines, etc. You are obsessed with your customers. So the insights that you gain about your customers and their world aligns with what those objectives are that you have for the business. So you'll have those objectives and then say, okay, what do we know about our customers that can help us get to those objectives? So it could be the different type of customers, etc. And then from the customers, you say to yourself, okay, now that we know the world of our customers and how they like to do business and the way that they make decisions, which is really important, what are the behaviors that we are looking for and want to encourage in the salespeople that we have? And then once we know what those behaviors should be, we then ask ourselves, what's the commercial structure that is going to be conducive to encouraging those behaviors? So I'm going to give you an example here from those 10 areas. And all these areas are quite complex, so it's very hard to describe this within a few minutes, but I'm going to give you an example of what to consider when it comes to the incentive structure that you want to put in place. And most people make the mistake of just putting a very simple commission-based plan where if you reach 100%, you get 10% of the sales. If you reach 120, you get 15%, et cetera, et cetera. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. What you need to consider is that conducive to the environment of the buying process from our customers, right? So let's talk about some of those objectives first, right? So again, revenue growth, profitability, timelines, even things like the number of customers that you want to bring on board. So I spoke to a company a few weeks ago. Their plan was 150 by 150. So 150 million from 150 clients, right? And they had their own reasons why. But you want to get clear on what your objectives are, and you want to have a kind of almost an agreement of what that needs to be. Then you want to think about the complexity of your solution, because that will go into and factor into the incentive scheme that you have structured. So, for example, how long does it take for a buyer to implement your solution? What is the cost for them to displace their existing ways of working or their existing supplier? Now, this is an element that's really not considered very much by salespeople as a whole and by founders, but it's a very important element to whether someone's going to buy from you or not. So what is that cost of displacement? How many stakeholders are involved from the buyer side to make a decision, and who are they? What is the cost to them, right? So just the basic cost of the solution. How sensitive is that change going to be, right? So does it impact their brand? Does it impact any regulatory requirements, right? Does it impact a big portion of the business and touches on some very critical infrastructure, for example? So how sensitive that change is going to be very important to the complexity of your solution. And the other thing is how many people are involved in your side in the sales process. Those answers to those questions are going to help you then decide what type of incentive scheme and structure do we need to consider, right? So the things to also consider are, the customer's behaviors, risk versus reward. Is what you're offering them mission critical, or is it nice to have? And you need to be very honest with yourself about that. So a lot of founders are quite delusional in thinking that what we do is mission critical, but if they ask their buyers, they will say the complete opposite. So this is where customer centricity comes in. That's very important. How are your buyers educating themselves, right? On average, only 19% of the buyer's buying journey involves a salesperson. That means that 71% so that means that that much of the time is spent educating themselves by other means. So someone else is influencing the buyer, which means that they are making decisions based on someone else's input. And that will impact how you approach your buyers and the incentive structure that you're going to be putting in place. So what are the decisions that they have made? And you need to be sensitive to, some of the changes that they might be going through as well, right? So how important is that to them? So to give you an example of the incentive structure, there is a balance that you need to consider based on the base pay and the variable pay, right? So think of base pay as just a base salary that someone will have. And this will be, what you're going to be looking at are certain factors like the industry benchmark. You're going to be looking at the complexity and the length of the sales cycle. You also want to look at things like the company culture as well, things like collaborative environment, etc. And the variable pay is the commission structure, right? And you're going to look at some of those important elements based upon the growth, based upon the buyer's process, and it's a balance, right? And too often founders forget that there is a balance. They actually forget that, or they actually have an incorrect balance structure that actually harms their sales process. So I've come across a company where the average sales cycle is 6 to 12 months, but they had a very basic low base pay, very high variable structure, and that encouraged very harmful behaviors in the salespeople. If you're going to have that longer sales cycle, you want to give your salespeople some sort of certainty, right, around their money and their income, so that they're able to actually have the patience to do the right activities for that long period of time with someone that they are courting as a new client. So here is a very simple model that you can consider, right? Long sales cycles, team-dependent sales structure, very complex solutions, you're going to tend to shift towards a higher base pay, right? And then the opposite side, where you have a shorter sales cycle, where the seller is more dependent and then they're more autonomous, and the seller is going to be central to actually delivering on the solution or delivering on at least a sale. And where the delivery of the solution is less complex, then you're going to shift the balance a little bit more towards the higher variable pay. And then the final thing that you want to look at, which is one of the biggest mistakes made when it comes to incentives, is that most founders put all their effort in the money side, right? The money is the thing that's going to reward salespeople. We want salespeople who are motivated by money, right? Money hungry. And that's a dangerous balance, because you might encourage some disastrous behaviors, right? And unethical behaviors. So you need to balance it with non-monetary rewards, because there are some salespeople, and these tend to be the really valuable ones, who are, yes, motivated by money, but they're also motivated by other things in terms of their personal growth, for example. And you want to encourage that. It also helps you in terms of your profitability if you look at some of those non-monetary rewards. So some examples are just very simple recognition and praise, right? So we all have egos. Salespeople apparently have more than others, although that's not necessarily true, but just the recognition and praise, if done in the right way, can go a very long way. Physical rewards, right? So these are rewards that show them in terms of recognition of the success that they've had. So some companies have sweaters, t-shirts, fleeces, things like that for the year, and it's very it's very obvious to see that on people. So if someone's wearing that red jumper, for example, at Christmas time, it's got the brand of your business, then it's very clear to everyone else in the company this is a high performer, and people sometimes love that recognition. It could be something as simple as a Filofax or a pen, something that's physical that also others in the business can instantly recognize as a reward for their incredible success that year. It also builds the self-esteem in the salesperson as well. Learning and development. Now, this is really important. Training programs, development programs, courses. A lot of salespeople, particularly the high performers, value knowledge, value advancements in skills. And instead of just pushing commission at them, what you can do is, once they've earned the right for that, you can sponsor their involvement in a particular program, a program that's going to advance their skills and that's also aligned to your business as well. So that could be a very valuable method of reward. Special projects. So for example, salespeople, especially the good ones, love to be involved in new product development because they have insights that they can share from the customers themselves, right? So they could be very valuable to the product development process. So having them involved in those special projects is a reward that a lot of them really jump at. So that could be one. And then the other one, which is shadowing the founders or the C-level executive, right? Or mentored by them. The high-performing salespeople absolutely love that because it also helps them understand the mind of those founders. How do they make decisions and why do they make decisions? How do they think about some of those decisions and weigh them up? Because it also translates to the people that they sell to as well. So the more they know about how you as a founder and as a leader make a decision, the better they are at being able to understand how their buyers go through those decision processes as well. And sometimes that can often be a very cheap, but also very valuable way of giving rewards to your salespeople. And then there could be some special rewards. So a good example is, Chairman Holiday Club, right? So the top 2 or 3 salespeople, whatever it might be in your business, the top 10%, those that qualify, or top 1% even, get to go on an all expenses paid trip for them and their partner to an exotic location, for example. Those types of rewards, whilst they are common, are hugely valuable. In fact, one of the levers where sales talent consider whether they should go with a company or not is whether they invest in such rewards. So you might want to consider that. It doesn't have to be incredibly exotic, but it should be something that is desirable enough to motivate a salesperson to deliver and over-deliver. So the infrastructure that I've been talking about is part of the service that we have. So there are 3 levels of service, but this particular one is looking at building that infrastructure for you. And this is kind of why my business comes in and help you in that way, because we have so much experience. We've built this for our own businesses. We've built this in companies where we were employed. And we've also built this for a lot of other businesses who are in similar positions to yours where they're scaling. So we certainly get involved in, the entrepreneur's coaching, and helping train the team, because you don't want to build the right infrastructure and neglect the training. But this section I've described fits under the 3rd category, which is the sales infrastructure. And this is based on best practices. And as you can see, we talked about all the other areas in the previous slides. And what we share with you isn't just our methodology or what we think is right. This is based on best practices with hundreds and hundreds of companies that we've observed to see how are they doing this and what is it that the best are doing that separates them from everyone else. So we would actually be able to give you a blueprint. This is called a sales functional blueprint. And it's a set of documents, about 80 documents in there that are all structured, that with our guidance and our coaching can help you create, in detail, the right compensation plan. We will help you assess the maturity of your sales function. So where are you now in terms of skill sets and competencies? And what do you need to look like in 3 or 4 years' time? And what are the steps in that growth period? And how can you measure that you are growing in the right way? We will help you kind of manage and create the right channel for you. We'd even help you, and this is a problem that we often see with founders and things that they share with us, that's a real challenge, is how do we improve the accuracy of our forecasting methodology, right? And we can help you with that, even down to the leadership and management of sales. What is the cadence for that? What is the governance? How do you do that in the best way? So we have detailed methodologies for being able to help you, and we'll give you that blueprint so that even if our coaching and relationship ends, you still have the blueprint to hand, which you can refer back to give you guidance and all the options that you can potentially take. So here are some examples, because sales covers about 24 different competencies that you can see here. Right, so here are some examples here of tools that you'll have at your disposal with that. So what are the critical competencies that we need to prioritize based upon our subjective but also reflective assessment of our business according to those 24 competencies? So this helps us all prioritize which ones we address first. How do we create the right targets for our sales team? And this is not just about average order value, and then you divide the territory up and then you say, okay, you're in charge of €500,000. No, there's a lot more to that to be able to create the right sales target. Because even successful salespeople, if their business do not do things in the right way, a large proportion of them will leave within 30 to 60 days because the onboarding process has not been optimal. So you might lose people that you've taken a long time to find who are absolutely right for the job just by things that you're not doing correctly. We even help you create an onboarding plan for your sales team, right? So making sure that you are reducing your own risk, even if you do mistakenly hire someone that's incorrect, that you're able to observe those indicators for where they might be harmful and have an exit plan for them, right? So we can create for you an onboarding plan that will mitigate that risk, but also enhance the value that you give to the right people that you've hired as well. So it helps speed up the productivity timeline. So all of that leads to these best practices. There are tools, there are templates, there are guides for every one of you, and we help put that in place for you. We kind of coach you in that process. We even spend time observing your business so that we can make the right recommendations. So hopefully that all makes sense. I tried to share something within an hour that's hugely complex. I don't know how much time we have, so we've only got a few minutes left, but would love to hear anyone's thoughts who are on the line. And I'm happy to answer any questions as well, right? So if you have any questions about a particular thing that I've shared or something to do with your business, I'm happy to give you an answer for that right now.
I'll step in here because one comment and one question. I liked what you said about the non-monetary rewards. I've run several sales teams over my career, and the last larger sales team was a few years back at Agoda, which is Booking.com's sister company. And there I actually asked my team, what do they value as far as a sales reward? And over 90% of them didn't want money, which is very interesting. People wanted a day off or a half day off or something else, like what you mentioned. And then my question would be, you talked about client feedback mechanisms. And what have you found? Because there's so many different ways to collect client feedback, by surveys, by, some companies are on Facebook and they look at comments or depending on the nature of your business. But what do you find are some of the most effective ways to collect feedback from clients?
So it's a great question. So the first thing that you have to look at is the characteristics and the profile of your customers themselves. So understanding who they are and how they like to engage with people is a really important thing that you need to first look at, because that will help you then design how do we actually ask those questions in the first place. So as you said, there are some people that respond better to surveys. There are some that respond better to just having that conversation with you. So first thing I recommend is figure out and understand how your buyers like to engage with you. Some of the most effective that I've seen actually is just the salesperson asking the questions during the meetings. And they might be encouraged. So there was a company, in previous companies that I've worked in, where we had a service-based, subscription-based business. halfway through the subscription, the 12-month subscription, so at the 6 months mark, we would actually do a relationship review, and we were encouraged to do a relationship review with the buyers. So in that relationship review, we were given guidance on the types of questions that we should be asking, right? So, in terms of the outcomes that we agreed to at the beginning of our relationship, how are we tracking to that? How do we see that we are tracking in this way? How do you feel about that? Do you feel that we are doing the right job here? Did you expect more? You can even ask questions such as, in terms of how you're absorbing the service that we're providing you in the business, can you tell me a bit about your experience with that? What is working well? What are some of the elements that are not working so well that you're experiencing? Right. So especially in a B2B environment, one of the most effective ways is just to empower, train, and measure your salespeople in asking those questions, because hopefully they've built a good enough relationship that they can ask those questions. And that iterative process will help you uncover the real insight. The problem with the surveys is that A, not a lot of people like to fill in surveys. B, they're very high level, right? So they only get to the surface of what someone's thinking in terms of answering. And C, you have to structure those surveys in a way where you're only giving them finite options. But what if the value is in between one of those options? How do you find out how do you kind of uncover that value? So in our research, we found that salespeople directly asking that is probably the most powerful way. Failing that, of course, sell surveys. Sorry, not sell surveys, offer the surveys. You don't want to rely on just one mechanism. You want to have a few, but get clear on which ones are the most important that will give you the most valuable insight, and kind of cascade down, right? So if they don't answer the first one, or if they don't respond to the first one, have a backup option that you can send to them. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, Henrik, Carter, Terence?
Yeah, I have comments and questions. First of all, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. But I would spell customers a little bit differently.
Yes, I noticed that.
I couldn't resist. Yeah, and I agree with you with your comments to start with, in that most sales processes and sales techniques and all those are based in the 90s, 80s and the 90s actually. And they came out of the Friedman doctrine, many of them, with empirical driven processes and what have you. But you allude to quite a few of them here as well.
Yeah.
But personally, I'm trying to build a business, yeah? But there's one thing that I think is going to change fundamentally, that's going to impact every single thing you said in this presentation.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the bigger move in the world as we see it now, yeah, is that we see a need for stop selling and start serving. So it becomes much more service oriented. And we saw it first in the financial area with the service economy, et cetera, and now we see it in people don't want to have the same possessions as they had before, like music, but also in B2B, in SaaS solutions and so on. And also before it was all these networking sessions, and it was more about people you knew, yeah. And I remember, and I heard this here the other day, but I remember I asked at the conference in Nice many years ago. It's all about this networking session that took place in a bar outside the main auditoriums and so on. And I said, how many people actually knows us? Yeah, out of here, other than they have a name to the organizer. Yeah. So it's much. So if you want to influence, yeah, people need to know you. Not you know people, but people need to know you. Otherwise, you can't influence. And that comes to certainly back to what you said about collaborative, consultative and collaborative and so on, and long-term engagement, as opposed to knock the door and put up your sales thing. And another thing that there's also some things that I think everybody should think about. That's most or every company has customers, but only few great companies have an audience. Think about Apple. Yeah, think about Apple. There are hundreds of millions that is viewing their latest announcement. They have an audience. Yeah. While Ballmer, when he took over Microsoft, he destroyed a lot of the things that Gates had built. Yeah, he had customers. He fought like hell, and he lost one after one after one. Yeah. So how do you build an audience, right? How do you serve so that you get that audience? Yeah, which is also part of sales, but the sales have changed so dramatically. And it's all about what you said about leading up to sales rather than the actual order box. But here is the final one, and that is people don't fall in love with corporations. They fall in love with personalities. And do the man who founded your company have that personality? Yeah. So and all of this is kind of interconnected. Yeah, it's not sales in isolation of the other, it's another the isolation of them. So that salesperson or that relationships builder, he needs to have the ability to join the dots. And here is my claim: when you move sales forces today from feature function sales, as I call it, up to be collaborative and consultative, less than 5% make it. That's where is the fundamental change. Yeah, they simply don't comprehend. Yeah, how do we deal with that?
I mean, that is a hugely big topic, right? And I've spent, and that's the whole business that I do, and I've spent several podcast sessions that I've been invited to talk about things. It's one of the, it's the topic for my upcoming book. Let's start with the first thing, which is and excuse my writing here, right? So outcomes. You talked about personalities, and that's a mechanism, but actually all the customer cares about are my outcomes. The customer cares about him or herself. They couldn't care less about you until they see that you can help them with their outcomes. And by the way, one of the biggest mistakes here is people think it's a logical or business outcome, right? Yes, part of it, but actually the majority, if not almost all of it, is emotional. Every single decision, and I don't want to go into the neuroscience and psychology behind it, it'll take too long, but the precursor to a thought is the emotion. That from the 5 stages, from sensory to action, the precursor to thought and action is emotions, right?
Can I just shoot one thing in here, please? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you. And since you mentioned neurology, I'm a fan of neurology, and I just got a big eye opener by following Huberman's Lab lately. Have you followed Huberman's Lab? Right? I recommend everyone to follow that. It is absolutely phenomenal. Sorry, I just had to say it. Yeah.
No, of course, and I mean, this is where, because of the technologies that we have, like MRI, etc., these new technologies are enabling us to really see some more details around how the neurons are behaving, how the different parts of the brain are behaving. We didn't understand that before, just because the technology wasn't there. But just to go back to what you said, outcomes are what your buyers are interested in. So having, and you talked about service. Well, I would certainly like to understand your definition of service, but before we get into that, one of the things that you've got to be very, very careful about is customer service. Now, you might be thinking, hang on a second, what do you mean you've got to be careful about that? Exemplary customer service, or a focus on customer satisfaction, will harm your business in the long term. Why? Because if you're increasing the effort for customer satisfaction, your buyers are very good at managing and negotiating price agreements. So even if their prices stay flat, but most likely over the long term with inflation, it will decrease. That means this gap here, right, is unprofitable. So you are spending and investing more time, energy, and effort to make them happy, but at a cost to your profitability. What you should be doing is focusing the business, right, and focusing your salespeople, not on customer service. Oh, sorry. Oh, why isn't it working? Here we go. But on customer growth. That's why account management is really not great. It's about account growth. So there are many facets to what you talked about. The other thing that we do is that, let me just erase all this. How do we counter that? Look, I have to be honest, good salespeople are few and far between, right? Unfortunately. And I'm part of a movement where we're trying to change global sales processes. And it really starts from the investor level, to be honest, as well as the founders and the CEOs, because those expectations can harm salespeople. But the first thing that you've got to understand is that in terms of skills, trust. I interviewed almost 400 buyers across 10 industries over the 15 years in this research program. Trust and honesty were expressed as the main reason why they selected to work with a particular seller, whether it's a competitive bid or a non-competitive bid, by almost every. In fact, there was only one that didn't mention those words. And that manifests itself in so many different ways. And I've got a research paper, and in the previous video, actually, I talked about the 8 characteristics of trust. So if you want to look at that, then you can look at, we can send you that link. That was a 15-year study. But there are other elements that establish trust. Number one, did that salesperson teach me something new? We all want to leave a conversation smarter or having learned something new. And the most valuable are those salespeople that are able to help the buyers see around corners, i.e., see unforeseen circumstances that could harm them, or unforeseen opportunities that they might be missing. We all value people that are able to tell us things that we don't know, help us see around corners. And the most effective salespeople are those who are, if I give you an example, I spoke to a legal expert, an IP lawyer, and he was struggling to create more business for his firm. And we talked about all the usual IP law approach, etc., like all the things that they were doing in terms of patent law. And there was very little that you can separate between one patent law firm versus another, just about quality, for example, right? That's the main one. And then I asked him, well, where are companies wasting or losing a lot of money when it comes to patent law? Is it about speed of creating the right documentation? Is it about quality of the documentation so that they are granted the patents? Where do people lose a lot of money? And he said, well, one of the things that they don't see is patent espionage. So I said, tell me more about that. It turns out that the average large company loses $10 billion with a B, $10 billion because of patent espionage. So these are key people in the business that don't realize they're giving away information. Unintended, it's not malicious, but they're giving away information. So I said to him, how many of those companies have had training on avoiding patent espionage? He said, barely any, because they don't know what to do with it. And then I said, well, do you have the skills to do so? He said, absolutely. I said, how are you discussing that with your clients or your potential clients? He says, no. I said, well, that is where you need to talk to them. So now his message is not about we are smart, we can deliver your patent, etc. They can do that, but he's saying extra things like saying, are you aware that the average company like yours loses $10 billion, not because of not being able to submit patents correctly, but because of patent espionage? Now, all of a sudden, those buyers are not aware of that information. Your brain rewards new information in the same reward mechanisms that rewards you for eating sugar. So it's incredibly valuable. Now, in order to do that,
there's more to that than what you're saying. I mean, just look to China. How much haven't they stolen? Yeah, in technology that is technologically patent. Yeah,
yeah,
and there's another side of it as well. And in large scale, particularly technological purchases, right, or investments, customers tend to spend huge amount of time and legal time, which is phenomenally expensive, of sort of protecting themselves contractually. Yeah. So if you develop this software for us, it's our intellectual property right and so on. Yeah. And then they invest $100 million in that solution, and 5 years later, right? First of all, it's uncontrollable. And secondly, 5 years later, they replace that system, so it's worthless, right? I brought this up to a customer once when he asked, what is the return on investment? So first of all, I can't tell you what the return on investment is because I don't know the interest rates you have to pay on loans. Is it a short-term loan, long-term loan? What type of investments? Well, how do you get your funding for the investments? So I can't tell you the ROI. That's rubbish. And that's first one, someone had told him that. But also I told him about the negotiation, how much they lose about this, these things. And we won the bid. I know we won the project, but he said it's first time anybody had told him that.
Yes.
And I was surprised.
They're not trained to do so, Carter. They're not encouraged to do so, right? The sales leaders might want that, but then the discussion they have with that person is, how many cold calls did you do today? Not, let's practice how you're going to deliver that message to get the attention of the person when you're speaking to them.
Yeah, the empirical mechanisms in the sales cycle.
Yes,
stupid.
well, it's crazy, you're right. So, I mean, but here's the other thing. It requires a level of business acumen. Now, when there are countless surveys out there that have asked sales leaders about business acumen and its importance, a huge number of them say that it's important. Something like 70% say it's incredibly important. But when those sales leaders were asked, how much time have you invested in training your salespeople on business acumen? Less than 5% said that they've given them any kind of training like that, right? It's ridiculous. So we have a program that does that, but that's why it's so important. Most of these salespeople don't know how to read a financial statement, which means they don't know how those buyers are making decisions and what they're prioritizing. They're not able to articulate those things in a confident manner, right? So that goes a long way to establishing trust, because now you're not just giving them features and benefits, features and advantages, or even benefits, by the way. It requires more. We live in a radically transparent and a radically competitive world now, which means that these buyers have access to that information. So they're not looking for you as a salesperson. They're looking for you as someone to help them make the right decisions. The salesperson is not a salesperson. The salesperson is a decision-making agent. That means...
Can I ask you one question? Yeah?
Yeah.
When you assess sales professionals, because I did this when I was running sales teams, right? But I found that was very rare. I tried to assess how much of what they had was a profession, means that it was trained skills, as opposed to vocation, which is something that they have acquired on their own accord, right? Mm-hmm. Because vocation to me is much more valuable than trained skill, because that has critical thinkings behind it and joining dots. While trained skills are just a tunnel vision of a certain subject, yeah? Mm-hmm. So do you spend time on that at all?
Yeah.
Doing that?
Absolutely.
Vocation versus profession.
For us, what we've looked at is, vocation versus profession. For us, we found wasn't important to understand which was which, actually. And here's the why. It's the application of the knowledge that was important. So what we looked at was competency versus characteristics. So what are the traits and the characteristics of the individual versus the skills and competencies that they've acquired and how they apply them. So we spend more time looking at those two things. So what we mean by traits and characteristics are things like, how do they deal with setbacks and failure? Do they have a characteristics of consistent personal growth? Do they have discipline? So these are more characteristics and traits that we see as very important to the sales process and very important to being successful in business. And then we will look at the competencies and skills. We weren't too worried about whether they acquired that themselves or if they were trained on it. We were more worried about how they applied that knowledge in the given situation, right? But what we were really interested in was the characteristics, right? So yes, if 70% of it was acquired because they did their own self-learning, that's great, because that told us they have a characteristics of self-learning. They wouldn't wait on the company to teach them. They recognized that they need to grow in a certain way, and they did it themselves. So that's the level of where we are most interested in observing, and we have mechanisms and processes for being able to understand that in people. Yeah. But it's a very big topic.
There's a difference between knowledge and understanding. And understanding,
exactly.
If you have understanding, you can apply what you
That's why we looked at that.
in a much better collaborative way, right? Hence why I was so excited about vocation, because that then to develop a person's join the dot skills.
And I think we're defining it in slightly different ways.
It's a bit outside of this, so
no,
I'm thinking too much here.
No, but and I think it's a question of definition between us, right? Because I talked about application, which kind of leads to how you define it, which is understanding, right? How you apply it is really important. But there's also some training or even vocation training and knowledge that might be incorrect, right? So even though they've gone out and learned that vocation, right, on their own, they may misunderstand it and therefore apply it in an incorrect way. So that's why we were interested in looking at that application element, because then we can see how they've understood and how they've kind of thought about what it is that they've learned. But yeah, you're right. This is a big topic. It's a big topic. Yeah, it's a big topic. But I know that we're over time, Victoria. Sorry about that.
No, don't worry. I think everybody is very involved in the conversation and interested, so that's nice to see.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing to take away is that, you've got to think about sales as an infrastructure if you're going to scale your business. You can hire the best salespeople, and I've seen this countless times, but without the sales infrastructure, you will lose them. And you will lose it worse, you will lose them to your competitors, which can be incredibly harmful. So having the right infrastructure, even if you hire a sales leader, you've got to know how to manage that person. You've got to know how to observe if they're doing the right things, right? Because they could be making very harmful decisions. So at the very least, this infrastructure, this sales functional blueprint helps founders understand sales better. And I'm doing this with several CEOs and founders right now, so that even the interview process, they have a better idea of how to interview those individuals and how to incentivize them, etc. So hopefully that's been useful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, Moeed. Thank you. And just for everybody in the chat here, I've posted the link to Moeed's last webinar if you'd like to see the video from the last a couple of weeks ago that he did on a different topic about persuasion and selling. That's in our chat here. So thank you again, Moeed. And of course, if anybody has any more questions for Moeed, they can take it up maybe one-on-one and take it on there. But we'll also post today's webinar on the GBO site tomorrow, and everybody will have a chance to look at it.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It's good to speak with you all.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very
Very
much.
good.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
Very
Yeah.
good. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Take care.
Likewise.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.